In the summer of 1953, the world witnessed a drama that would echo for decades. A democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mosaddegh, was overthrown in a coup orchestrated not by Iranians alone, but by foreign powers, the CIA of the United States and the MI6 of Britain. The prize: control over oil, influence over Iran, and a strategic foothold in the Middle East at the dawn of the Cold War. Tehran, a city teeming with merchants, students, clerics, and bureaucrats, had become a chessboard. Every alley, every bazaar, every whisper of dissent or loyalty mattered. Citizens went about their daily lives, unaware that the world's most powerful nations were about to pull strings that would alter the trajectory of their nation. "This is a matter of necessity," wrote Allen Dulles, then director of the CIA, in a top-secret memorandum. "Iran must be returned to stable, pro-Western leadership, or we risk losing not just oil, but influence across the region." Over the next few weeks, streets would erupt in chaos, loyalties would shift, and a government built on nationalist ideals would face its most existential threat. Chapter 1. Iran, before Mosaddegh. Historical and social context. Iran, at the turn of the 20th century, was a nation struggling to define itself. The Qajar dynasty had long been the formal rulers, but real power was fragmented. Tribal leaders, provincial governors, and foreign powers wielded influence that often outweighed that of the monarchy. In 1908, oil was discovered in Masjid Soliman. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later renamed the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, would extract profits on a massive scale, sending most of the wealth to Britain. Iranian citizens saw little of this money. Villages remained impoverished, urban centers underdeveloped, and national resentment simmered. The world wars amplified this tension. In 1941, Allied forces occupied Iran, forcing Reza Shah to abdicate and installing his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, as a monarch. While young and formally in power, the Shah's authority relied heavily on Western support. Ordinary Iranians faced a daily reality of scarcity: bread queues, rising prices, and foreign-controlled resources. Yet they also had a growing sense of political awareness, fueled by newspapers, urban centers, and a small but vocal middle class advocating for national sovereignty. Oil and geopolitics. Britain treated Iranian oil as a cornerstone of its empire. From London's perspective, losing Iran's oil would jeopardize the economy and global influence. To them, Mossadegh's growing nationalist sentiment was not just political. It was a threat to the lifeblood of Britain's industrial power. In 1948, a British Foreign Office memo warned, "Iran is a prize not for the taking, but for the controlling. Any attempt by nationalists to seize oil assets must be countered by economic, political, or covert means." This would foreshadow the events of 1953. Mossadegh's rise coincided with a global chess game between Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union, each vying for influence in a nation rich in strategic resources. Everyday life and political sentiment. Tehran's streets were a microcosm of the larger struggle. Merchants sold goods imported through British trade networks. Students debated politics in coffee houses. Clerics, wary of foreign influence but suspicious of Marxist ideology, voiced opposition in sermons. Social inequality and foreign domination created fertile ground for Mossadegh's message. He promised a return of Iran's wealth to its people, challenging centuries of foreign control. "Oil belongs to the Iranian people, not foreign empires," Mossaddegh would later proclaim, igniting both popular support and international ire. Chapter 2. Early life and political formation of Mossadegh, childhood and education. Mohammad Mosaddegh was born in 1882 into a family of bureaucrats and merchants in Tehran. His early life exposed him to the workings of government and commerce, but also to the inequalities of Iranian society. He pursued education abroad, studying in France and Switzerland. There, he encountered liberal democratic ideas, parliamentary systems, and European philosophies of national sovereignty. These formative experiences shaped his belief that Iran's resources should benefit its own people rather than foreign empires. Returning to Tehran, Mossaddegh entered law and politics, combining intellectual rigor with a deep nationalist fervor. He became known as a man of principle, meticulous in research, and unwavering in his vision of an independent Iran. Parliamentary career and nationalism. In the 1920s and 1930s, Mossaddegh served in parliament, advocating for transparency and economic reform. He challenged the Shah's court, foreign monopolies, and corruption in bureaucratic structures. His stance earned him both admirers and enemies. Clerics appreciated his moralistic approach but worried about his secular leanings. The military saw him as a critic, and foreign powers increasingly viewed him as a problem. Yet Mosaddegh gained traction among ordinary Iranians. His speeches, delivered in the majlis and public rallies, emphasized sovereignty, fairness, and self-determination. Each speech added momentum toward his ultimate goal: control of Iran's oil. The oil nationalization debate. By the late 1940s, the Anglo-Iranian oil company had become a symbol of national humiliation. Mosaddegh argued that the company's profits were flowing abroad, while Iran remained underdeveloped. In Parliament, he introduced proposals for nationalization. The debates were heated. British representatives lobbied behind the scenes, diplomats issued warnings, and the press fanned both fear and support. "If we do not reclaim our oil, we forfeit our independence," Mosaddegh said in 1950. His words resonated with a population increasingly disillusioned with foreign exploitation. Chapter 3. The Road to Crisis. Britain versus Iran, Economic Leverage. Britain's response to Mossaddegh's nationalist drive was swift. London refused to negotiate fair terms, imposed economic sanctions, and attempted to isolate Iran diplomatically. Oil tankers were blocked, contracts nullified, and legal battles in London dragged on. The British government recognized that Mosaddegh was not just a domestic politician, but a threat to imperial power. In a 1951 telegram, the Foreign Office instructed, "Immediate action is necessary to prevent Mosaddegh from consolidating power and disrupting British oil interests." International tensions. The Cold War context made Iran a strategic chess piece. The United States, initially cautious, grew concerned about the possibility of Soviet influence if Iran fell into chaos. The CIA began assessing Mossadegh's alignment and the feasibility of intervention. Analysts warned, Mosaddegh may not be a communist, but instability in Iran could be exploited by the USSR. For Britain, the solution seemed simple: remove Mosaddegh. For the United States, it was a question of balancing ideology, strategic interests, and public perception. Internal opposition and public sentiment. Inside Iran, opposition grew. Military officers feared Mossadegh's reforms, conservative clerics worried about secular overreach, and merchants were concerned about economic disruption. Meanwhile, the population remained divided. Some viewed Mosaddegh as a hero of independence, others feared instability. This domestic tension created the perfect conditions for foreign intelligence agencies to manipulate events, a lesson the CIA and MI6 would soon put into practice. Chapter 4. Mosaddegh becomes Prime Minister. In April 1951, Mohammad Mosaddegh was appointed Prime Minister of Iran. The Majlis had voted overwhelmingly in his favor, a triumph for Iranian nationalism. Yet the streets of Tehran were filled with tension, uncertainty, and anticipation. Mossadegh's mandate was clear: reclaim Iran's sovereignty, particularly over its most valuable resource, oil. But the Prime Minister quickly realized that leadership would require balancing a delicate political ecosystem: the monarchy, a fragmented parliament, foreign powers, and a population whose patience would soon be tested. One of his first acts was to solidify his cabinet with reform-minded allies. Finance ministers, foreign advisors, and legal experts were chosen not just for competence, but for loyalty to the nationalist cause. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was formally in power but increasingly sidelined by Mossadegh's assertiveness. Behind closed doors, the young monarch expressed discomfort, confiding to British diplomats, "He is clever, relentless. I fear I may be a figurehead before long." Mosaddegh, however, moved swiftly. He understood that time was of the essence. Britain would not tolerate the nationalization of oil, and any delay could provide his opponents an opportunity to undermine him. Building political alliances. Mossadegh's first challenge was domestic consolidation. The Majlis was divided. Conservatives opposed radical reforms, clerics demanded moral and religious oversight, and military officers remained loyal to the Shah. To navigate these waters, Mosaddegh employed a dual strategy. He courted moderate conservatives to build legislative support while keeping nationalist journalists and public opinion on his side. He understood that a coup attempt could emerge from either palace intrigue or foreign intervention. One member of his cabinet later recalled, "He was always calculating, always observing. In meetings, his gaze swept the room like a chess player noting every possible move. We knew he would not act rashly, but once he committed, it was irreversible." Chapter 5. Oil nationalization and the first showdown. Nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. In May 1951, Mosaddegh moved decisively. The Iranian parliament voted to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC. Overnight, Iran claimed sovereignty over a resource that had for decades fueled Britain's industrial empire. The move was met with jubilation in Tehran. Crowds gathered in the streets, waving flags and chanting, "Our oil, our nation." Newspapers praised Mosaddegh as a hero, a man who dared challenge imperialism. But the rejoicing in Tehran contrasted sharply with the panic in London. British reaction and economic pressure. Britain was enraged. The Foreign Office issued a formal protest, calling the nationalization illegal and unacceptable. British oil tankers were blocked from Iranian ports. Contracts were voided. Diplomatic channels were flooded with demands for compensation. A British official wrote in a telegram, "This government cannot accept a precedent where nationalization is used as a weapon against commercial interests. Action must be considered, covert if necessary." Britain's strategy combined economic warfare and propaganda campaigns, attempting to isolate Iran and undermine Mosaddegh domestically. They knew that a direct military intervention would be politically costly. Covert operations would be the preferred path. The role of the International Court. London took the dispute to the International Court of Justice, arguing that Iran had violated international agreements. Mosaddegh, however, was unyielding. His legal team meticulously documented centuries of exploitation, presenting a case that framed nationalization as a moral and economic necessity. While legal proceedings dragged on, Britain turned to a more potent tool, alliance with the United States. They argued that Mossaddegh's assertiveness, coupled with economic instability, could leave Iran vulnerable to communist influence, a threat the U.S. could not ignore during the height of the Cold War. Chapter 6. The United States enters. Eisenhower administration and Cold War calculus. The U.S., initially hesitant, began monitoring the situation closely. President Eisenhower's advisors worried that instability in Iran could be exploited by the USSR. Mosaddegh, though not a communist, was painted in intelligence reports as potentially susceptible to Soviet influence. CIA analysts circulated internal assessments warning of a domino effect in the Middle East if Iran fell into political chaos. Some argued for diplomatic pressure. Others, more hawkish, advocated direct intervention. Allen Dulles, CIA director, framed the problem starkly. "We either act to preserve Iran's independence from communist subversion, or we allow a vacuum to form in the Middle East, jeopardizing oil and strategic interests." The arrival of Kermit Roosevelt Jr. In early 1953, Kermit Roosevelt Jr. arrived in Tehran, tasked with coordinating covert operations. The grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt brought both determination and a willingness to take extraordinary risks. His mission: orchestrate a coup to remove Mosaddegh and restore the Shah's authority while maintaining plausible deniability for the United States. Roosevelt's first observations were sobering. Tehran was a city of complexity. Popular support for Mosaddegh was high. Factions within the military were unpredictable, and every action risked tipping the delicate balance of power. In his notes, Roosevelt wrote, "Every street corner, every bazaar, every whisper can become a threat or an ally. The challenge is not merely to topple a government, but to orchestrate perception." Early planning, propaganda, and bribery. The CIA and MI6 coordinated a multifaceted strategy, bribing military officers to switch allegiance, flooding Tehran with anti-Mossadegh propaganda via newspapers, radio broadcasts, and leaflets, organizing street riots to create a sense of chaos and fear, ensuring plausible deniability so neither the Shah nor Western powers could be directly implicated. One CIA cable read, "The psychological aspect is paramount. Mossadegh's public image must be eroded while maintaining the appearance of popular dissent." Chapter 7. The first attempts at destabilization. Street-level operations begin. Roosevelt began coordinating minor operations across Tehran. Small protests were staged, initially to test public reaction. Leaflets were dropped claiming Mossadegh planned communist takeovers. Radio broadcasts highlighted economic hardships and foreign warnings. Some officers in the Iranian military were secretly approached and offered financial incentives to participate in a coup. Others were threatened subtly, using personal and professional leverage. Despite careful planning, the first attempts were cautious, almost exploratory. Roosevelt needed to gauge both Mossadegh's resilience and public reaction before committing to a full-scale operation. public reaction, and popular support. While propaganda spread, Mossadegh's supporters rallied. Merchants, students, and clerics took to the streets to defend the government. In neighborhoods across Tehran, loyalists organized impromptu committees, reporting suspicious activity and distributing counter-propaganda. Citizens were caught in the middle. Some were swayed by rumors, others clung to nationalist sentiment. The city became a pressure cooker of uncertainty, a perfect environment for covert operatives to exploit. Analysis of early successes and failures. The first destabilization attempts were mixed. Some officers showed willingness to collaborate, others hesitated. Civilians were confused by conflicting messages. Mosaddegh remained publicly confident, refusing to yield under pressure. Roosevelt later reflected, "The operation is delicate. One wrong move, one public misstep, and the entire plan collapses. Timing, patience, and perception are everything." Chapter 8. The First Coup Attempt. Day 1. August 15, 1953. Tehran woke to a city on edge. Rumors of imminent unrest had spread through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and whispered conversations in bazaars. Mosaddegh, aware of the possibility of a coup, convened a cabinet meeting early in the morning. His advisors debated whether to deploy loyal military units preemptively or wait and gauge the situation. Mosaddegh insisted on restraint, understanding that any aggressive move could be portrayed as tyranny by foreign propagandists. Meanwhile, Kermit Roosevelt Jr. and his network activated the first phase of Operation Ajax. Small teams of operatives began distributing leaflets across Tehran, claiming that Mosaddegh had secretly allied with the Soviet Union and intended to confiscate private property. Rumors of communist plots began circulating through coffeehouses and markets. Street-level confusion was immediate. Civilians confronted each other. Neighbors debated the veracity of the leaflets. Shopkeepers argued over the legitimacy of Mossadegh's policies. Students shouted slogans both supporting and opposing the government. The city became a live theater of perception and influence. Bribing the military. At the same time, Roosevelt focused on the Iranian military. Officers were secretly approached with promises of payment, rank advancement, and political protection if they supported the coup. Some were skeptical, fearing reprisal if the plan failed. Others were swayed by the chaotic environment and perceived inevitability of Mossadegh's fall. A note from Roosevelt to CIA headquarters read, "We must cultivate doubt among Mossadegh's loyalists while fostering confidence among those we intend to bribe. The operation's success depends on precise manipulation of perception." By late morning, several military units had received orders that conflicted with their loyalty to the Prime Minister. Some units hesitated, some acted with caution, and some openly defied orders. Tehran's streets were alive with uncertainty. Chapter 9. Street Riots and Public Chaos. First explosions of violence. By mid-afternoon, orchestrated mobs began clashing with Mossadegh's supporters. Hired agitators, backed by CIA and MI6 funds, moved through crowded marketplaces, inciting fear and chaos. Fires were set in trash bins. Merchants shuttered their stores. The sounds of shouting, breaking glass, and distant gunfire echoed through alleys. Mossadegh's supporters, primarily students and union members, attempted to organize counter-protests. Barricades were erected, loyalist volunteers patrolled streets, and telegrams were sent to provincial commanders seeking reinforcements. Civilians were caught in the crossfire of perception. Was Mosaddegh truly a nationalist hero or a secret communist sympathizer? The fog of rumor spread faster than any broadcast. Psychological warfare. Leaflets proclaimed that Mossadegh's ministers were secretly collaborating with the Soviets. Radio broadcasts in Farsi painted vivid images of impending confiscation of private property, arrests of opposition, and the breakdown of law and order. The CIA understood that perception mattered more than reality. A single rumor, amplified by street-level agitation, could erode loyalty and induce fear. Mossadegh's base, while loyal, was forced into constant vigilance, unsure whom to trust. Chapter 10. Palace Hesitation. The Shah's Dilemma. The young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was torn. Loyal to the monarchy yet aware of Mossadegh's popular mandate, he hesitated to act decisively. Royal advisors urged caution, fearing international backlash if the Shah appeared to orchestrate a coup. In private meetings, the Shah expressed anxiety. "I am supposed to rule, yet I feel powerless. One wrong move, and the people will rise against me. One wrong move, and I will be blamed for everything." Meanwhile, Roosevelt's operatives continued to manipulate palace aides, feeding them information designed to encourage indecision and overestimation of Mossadegh's internal power. Military uncertainty. Orders to the army were deliberately contradictory. Some officers were told to secure key government buildings, others were told to stand down. The resulting confusion created hesitation and paralysis at critical moments. A brigade commander, later interviewed in declassified CIA files, recalled, "We didn't know who to obey. Some of our colleagues had already been bribed, others feared we'd be arrested if we acted. The streets looked like a war zone, yet no one was sure why." By evening, no decisive victory had been achieved. Mossadegh remained in office, the Shah was uncertain, and Roosevelt's plan appeared to falter. Chapter 11. Mossadegh's strategic response. Consolidation of loyal forces. Mossadegh quickly recognized that confusion was mounting. He ordered loyal military units to key intersections, secured critical government offices, and established communication with provincial leaders. His advisors suggested a preemptive strike against officers suspected of collaborating with the coup, but Mossadegh opted for restraint. He believed that overreaction could play into foreign propaganda, painting him as a tyrant rather than a nationalist hero. Telegrams sent to provincial governors emphasized vigilance. Do not escalate unless directly threatened. Maintain order, protect citizens, and report all suspicious activity. Public addresses. That evening, Mossadegh delivered a televised speech, calm and deliberate. Iran stands united. Our sovereignty is not for sale. Attempts to divide us through fear or rumor will fail. The speech rallied loyalists and reminded the public of Mossadegh's legitimacy. Yet the chaos in the streets continued, amplified by agitators and propaganda. Citizens were exhausted. Families huddled in their homes, unsure if the next step would be violence or resolution. The city was suspended in a fragile equilibrium, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Chapter 12. Day 2. Temporary setback. The first coup fails. By August 16th, the first coup attempt had collapsed. Key military officers refused to act. Mossadegh's loyal units held their ground, and the Shah's hesitation prevented decisive palace action. Roosevelt recorded in his diary, "Everything that could go wrong did. Mossadegh is still in power. Tehran is a labyrinth of uncertainty, but the operation is far from over. We must reassess, recalibrate, and return with greater force and precision." The failure revealed critical lessons. The loyalty of the military was fluid and unpredictable. Popular support for Mossadegh could not be underestimated. Propaganda alone was insufficient to induce collapse. Public sentiment. Despite the chaos, Mossadegh's support remained strong among certain sectors. Market workers, union members, and students organized volunteer patrols. Neighborhood committees formed to monitor suspicious activity. For the CIA and MI6, this was a warning. The operation required not just manipulation, but precision, timing, and psychological insight into both elites and the masses. Chapter 13. Planning the final coup. Following the failed first attempt, Kermit Roosevelt Jr. and his team returned to the drawing board. Lessons had been learned. Mossadegh remained popular, the military was unpredictable, and Tehran citizens were skeptical of agitators. The CIA and MI6 devised a two-phase strategy. 1. Destabilize public perception, flood Tehran with rumors of communist plots, threaten economic collapse, and exaggerate the support for the Shah. 2. Control key power points, secure military units, communication centers, and government offices while maintaining plausible deniability. Roosevelt emphasized subtlety. In his notes, "We cannot afford a direct confrontation. Our leverage is perception, fear, and calculated loyalty among the elite. Tehran must believe the Shah is inevitable, Mossadegh isolated, and resistance futile." Teams were deployed to bribe military officers, manipulate newspapers, stage small street protests, and secretly coordinate with palace aides. Psychological warfare and propaganda. Leaflets were distributed across neighborhoods. Mossadegh collaborates with communists. Protect your families. Radio broadcasts played eerie, repetitive warnings of instability and economic disaster. Rumors spread in coffeehouses. Foreign troops would intervene if Mossadegh did not resign. Roosevelt understood human psychology. By creating fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the public would begin to withdraw support from Mossadegh. Street-level chaos would amplify the effect, while carefully placed military units prepared to act. Chapter 14. Tehran on the edge. Street-level chaos. August 19, 1953. Tehran awoke under tension. Agitators, paid by CIA and MI6 operatives, roamed the streets, clashing with Mossadegh supporters. In the Grand Bazaar, merchants fled shops as fires were set in alleyways. Students aligned with Mossadegh organized defensive barricades, while union members patrolled streets to maintain order. Citizens were terrified and confused. A single gunshot in one district triggered panic across adjacent neighborhoods. The city's perception became the weapon itself. Chaos suggested the government was losing control, even where it wasn't. One newspaper editorial, likely influenced by covert funding, read, "The nation trembles under a government that cannot secure its own streets. Who will protect your families if Mossadegh remains in power?" Military coordination. Key military units, already bribed and persuaded, moved strategically. Roads to government buildings, radio stations, and the Majlis were blocked or controlled. Officers loyal to Mossadegh were misled, given conflicting orders to delay action. Roosevelt observed from safe houses, coordinating movements with encrypted messages. Positions are as expected. The city believes in imminent collapse. Timing is everything. Within hours, Tehran resembled a city under siege, though no official declaration had been made. Perception was reality. Chapter 15. Mossadegh's arrest, confrontation and betrayal. As chaos peaked, military units loyal to the Shah advanced on Mossadegh's residence. He was warned of potential betrayal within his cabinet and loyalist forces. Still, he maintained composure, insisting on a measured response to avoid civilian casualties. Roosevelt's team reported, "Loyalists are faltering. Mossadegh's communications are compromised. Arrest imminent." At approximately 10:30 a.m., Mossadegh was arrested. His capture was swift, almost anticlimactic. A few officers guided him into a car, escorted under the guise of maintaining order. Loyalist forces did not resist in key districts, confused by the layers of misdirection and conflicting orders. Immediate public reaction. News spread rapidly. Crowds initially protested, chanting support for Mossadegh. Within hours, propaganda amplified the narrative of inevitability. The Shah was restored to power, communists were thwarted, and order would return. Ordinary citizens, exhausted by days of unrest and fear, largely withdrew from the streets. Tehran's population, caught between perception and reality, gradually accepted the new status quo. Chapter 16. The Shah returns, triumphant but controlled. The Shah returned to Tehran, publicly welcomed by orchestrated crowds. Flags waved, royal guards marched in ceremonial precision, and media coverage painted a narrative of national relief. Yet behind the scenes, Roosevelt and his operatives controlled the narrative. Leaflets, newspapers, and radio broadcasts reinforced the message. The Shah was legitimate, Mossadegh's supporters were marginal, and stability had been restored. A CIA report summarized, "Operation Ajax has succeeded in the short term. Public perception aligns with strategic objectives. Monitoring will continue to prevent backlash." Consolidation of power. To secure the Shah's position, the CIA and MI6 recommended the creation of a secret police network. This led to the formation of SAVAK, tasked with identifying, intimidating, and neutralizing opposition. The new regime moved swiftly. Mossadegh supporters were arrested or silenced. Foreign-controlled oil contracts were reinstated under favorable terms. Military loyalty was ensured through promotion and reward. Chapter 17. Immediate consequences. Domestic impact. In Tehran, the streets gradually returned to normal. Yet fear lingered. Citizens learned that dissent could be dangerous. Neighborhood committees that had supported Mossadegh were disbanded. Economic recovery was slow but visible. British and American oil companies returned, bringing capital and infrastructure investment. The Shah consolidated his position, but the legitimacy of his reign remained fragile among nationalists. International reaction. Globally, Britain celebrated the reinstatement of its oil privileges. The United States, for its part, praised the operation internally, but avoided public acknowledgement to maintain plausible deniability. Soviet observers, however, took note. Operation Ajax represented a new type of Cold War intervention, one where covert influence, psychological operations, and manipulation of perception could achieve strategic objectives without open warfare. Chapter 18. Long-term fallout. Iranian politics and revolution. The coup planted the seeds of future unrest. Setback's repression, combined with continued foreign control over Iranian resources, created deep resentment. By 1979, these grievances fueled the Islamic Revolution, toppling the Shah and transforming Iran's political landscape forever. Mosaddegh became a symbol of nationalist pride and resistance, a figure whose ousting represented both the limits of democracy under foreign pressure and the costs of standing against global powers. Cold War lessons. For the CIA and MI6, Ajax became a blueprint. Psychological operations, manipulation of public perception, bribery, and staged chaos proved effective tools. Operation Ajax influenced covert interventions around the world, from Latin America to Southeast Asia. Yet the operation also demonstrated the long-term risks, creating regimes that rely on repression, undermining legitimate governance, and fueling anti-Western sentiment for decades to come. Epilogue. The echoes of Ajax. One summer in Tehran changed the course of history. Mossadegh's overthrow was not just a local event. It was a message to the world. Control perception, control power. Tehran's streets returned to calm, but the shadows of that coup stretched far into the future. Governments learned, populations suffered, and history recorded an operation that was decisive, yet morally complex. Operation Ajax reminds us that in the world of geopolitics, victory is often temporary, perception is reality, and the consequences can echo for generations.